Of course, it's Jerseydood back again, and we're still here with Mr. Orlando Solar Bear. I did mention last time about how clever and creative I thought the designers were, the marketing people that do this sort of thing. The cleverness is magnificent in hockey branding, particularly in the lower strata of league play. The lower the league play, the more branding is important because you have to create fan interest and get butts in seats, particularly those of children. Children bring the parents, parents have the money, and they spend it to keep their kids pacified. Anyway, we spoke a little bit of how to actually start the mundane process of drawing these pieces. My own learning has progressed to the point where I also think about how I'm going to stitch each particular color. There are many ways to approach that sort of thing, but I have greatly evolved my notions of how to draw the various elements. I'm sitting here, and the most complex element to me in this entire thing is the purple-blue shadow outline that creates the bear's image. On the face of it, as it were, that's a very simple part. I could very easily draw this as a complete purple-blue outline all the way around the outside, one solid block, and then do digitize holes and remove all of the interior portions of the purple-blue area to create the outline. That would be a relatively simple way of creating that piece. Now, if it were in black thread, it likely wouldn't matter how you did it. As long as it's stitched and it landed where you wanted it to be, it would be just fine because black doesn't show anything. In this case, it's purple-blue, and there is some opportunity to create some visual interest simply by breaking up that field of color into various component pieces and sequencing them in the stitch order such that they create visual interest and distance and spacing. So let's decide which of these elements would be in the foreground and which would be in the background. Let's look here at a very basic element. You have a little spike shadow coming down the side of the nose created by the glasses. Now, the reality is that the glasses would be on top of this slight little shadow here. And so, if you were to draw them, you might want to draw this little shadow first as a separate piece, and then have the glasses stitch over the top of it. That would create, by the fact that you could visibly see the layers of stitching, that would create an order that would make this little shadow recede behind the glasses. That's getting a bit esoteric, I realize, but those kinds of things are what differentiate between just embroidery and real artwork. So those are the things I've got in my mind as I begin to contemplate this process. But to start out with, we have simple things like these details, which we'll stitch first, as we discussed last time, because they're on top and they come in last. So we've just chosen digitize closed shape. This is a random enough shape that I will use the closed shape tool to create this. And bear in mind that for some reason when I'm drawing these things, the cursor arrow does not seem to line up in the video where it actually does as I'm drawing these pieces. So there, we've got our stitch attributes set on cross stitch, so we need to bring this up and turn it into a tatami fill, or tatami, as dear Maggie would say. And the color is relatively unimportant at this point. We can turn it into something. There's one that relatively closely matches the actual color in the design. Reshape. I'm just going to quickly change the stitch angle because it looks really ugly and jaggy. But there's our first piece drawn, and I will work my way along. We'll draw the second one, close shape. Just pick a place to start. These are bonehead, simple little shapes here that we can draw very quickly. And it has locked onto cross hatch because that's what we did in one of the previous videos. It takes a while for the bonehead software to catch up with the bonehead designer, but we will go ahead and draw all of these top elements. Now I've used closed shape to do those. Now this highlight across the top of the glass frame is more of a line, even though it has varying width and shape. This is a perfect time to utilize the Digitize Blocks tool, and that was one that I came to relatively late. Terry at Janome, who was very helpful to me as I tried to fight my way into actually becoming a reasonably good digitizer. Terry was the person that suggested that Digitize Blocks would be my ultimate friend when designing shapes like this, and particularly satin stitch. So she was right on in that regard. And that's Terry at Janome USA, one of the very few people at Janome that Maggie had any time for at all. And I know that Mags did like Terry quite a lot. And to those of us in the US that have Janome equipment or software, she has been particularly helpful. So we're still stuck on crosshatch. The software hasn't realized that I'm not doing crosshatch. I've changed that. Since it's relatively thin, I've changed that to a satin stitch, and that makes the Digitize Blocks tool makes a very quick way of drawing shapes like that. It wouldn't be at all appropriate for doing a shape like this that comes in and out of itself so often. But when you're doing something where the sides are relatively parallel to each other, where you can have pairs of nodes across from each other, such as you see here, it's the perfect tool for doing things like that. Very fast, very quick, very efficient. Let's see, we've got one more little detail here. That's another perfect one for Digitized Blocks, and all we need is just a couple there, and we've created that piece, and we're still defaulted to that, but we can quickly change it. And there's a color, and there's our piece. So we have our first pieces, the smallest details of our drawing for the ultra cool Orlando Solar Bear.